So Ian is the co-county recorder for flora in Hertfordshire. He's past president of the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland, and chair of the trustees. Ian's going to talk a little bit about his work with Trevor on flora of Hertfordshire. Ian.
Thank you. This is working, I hope. Thank you, Peter, and thanks to the Society for letting me take part in this very notable event. I had an email about an hour ago, and it's from Pete Strobel, who is the scientific officer of the Botanical Society and a personal friend of Trevor's, and he was basically ruining the fact that he couldn't make it today. But I thought I'd just read out a couple of sentences. He said, "I was thinking of Trevor only yesterday while roaming the verges near Nottinghill after finishing recording the Spiranthes plot." Spiranthes is also ladies' dresses. It's an orchid that's been monitored there for decades. He figures in my thoughts often and always when out in the field, so in that respect, right, John. So in that respect, although he's not missed, Trevor is still present in the landscape. I can't think of a better way to be remembered. And that's, I think, very nice words which I share. We've had some very moving tributes, and I concur with all those sentiments. I moved to Hertfordshire in 1980. I finished a PhD on insect genetics at Liverpool, and I came to a very short-term appointment at Rochester, which ended up lasting 32 years. But I also had a great passion for botany, and I had fantastic access to local botanists, exceptionally John Doe and Trevor James, who were all very, very generous with their expertise in botany. Trevor and John Doney, I'll talk about it more in a minute, so I always felt his heart was really in Bedfordshire. Trevor's heart was very much in Hertfordshire. I'd echo what Tim has said about Trevor's encyclopedic knowledge of the county, not just the wildlife, the topography, the history, the geography. So he probably knew most of the fields. I think he knew most of the lay-bys and the gateways. It's been absolutely astonishing. So I am going to talk to this title, but before I do, I'm going to digress with a couple of very short botanical stories in which Trevor figured. You may not recognise this photograph, but in early 2016, Trevor was contacted by Ian Carl at the Record Centre to say someone had found a military orchid in Hertfordshire at a site between Hatfield and St Albans. This is an absolutely astonishing suggestion because military orchid is a mega rarity nationally. It's got three sites, two in the Shawston, one in Brecon. So he sent the photograph to me as the joint national recorder, referee for wild orchids. It was a military orchid, and Chris, Trevor, and I arranged to meet one evening and go and have a look at this site. So this is it. It's the CMEX sort of site between St Albans and Hatfield. It's incredibly high profile trespass. We went in the evening. And so here is Trevor with the camera at the site. I don't know why he's pointing us there because the plant is there. But it is indeed a military orchid. Used to be fairly common on the Shawston slopes around Tree until I think it was declared extinct in 1902. So it's a really, really important find. Just one plant. So that was 2016. 2017 it didn't appear. 2018 I don't think anyone went to look. In 2019 I risked trespassing here, and it was too early for it to have set seed, but it had reproduced vegetatively. The tumour had divided. So there were now two family spikes and the barren rosette. So I was really quite excited when I approached the site in 2020, partly because I was excited about what I might find, partly because it's very high profile trespass, and partly because I was breaking every rule related to knockdown. And that was it. It's not only is the plant gone, but the habitat had completely been destroyed and completed. And there's all sorts of messages to learn from that, which I'm not going to go into now, I get very worked up about it all. But that was the first story I wanted to tell. And the second relates to a paper published by Trevor in the New Journal of Botany. He had long harboured suspicions that plants which had been identified as lesser tufted sedge in the vicinity of Bruthley in eastern county were not lesser tufted sedge. And he collaborated with this chap whose name I won't attempt to pronounce. on the continent to establish categorically that this site contained species hitherto unknown in Britain, called what we call the scarce tufted sedge, Carex sesquitosa. And actually, it looks nothing like tufted sedge. It's a fantastically majestic plant. Some of these tussocks must be decades old. Another small area where it occurs very close by, and here we have two of the UK's botanical illuminati. Fred Rumsey, formerly of the Natural History Museum, and Pete Stroud himself in the foreground. And essentially, it's only been known from that one site in Britain. And Richard Lansdowne and I published in the SBI newsletter, surely all recorders must go out and check their tufted sedge records just in case this thing is being overlooked elsewhere. And no one came back to us. So we have to assume that it is the only site, and in fact this is one of only two vascular plant species that has its only native or natural UK British site in Hertfordshire. And there's a spot prize for anyone who can tell me the lunch break what the other one is. Right, I'll get back to this title. Essentially what I'm saying, anyone like Trevor or who's a recorder for a particular taxonomic group in a particular part of the country has a really important role to play that works also in broader context. Generally speaking, there will be predecessors, and you're building up upon their records to improve and continue the timeline of records. So that's the time dimension. And Hertfordshire doesn't exist in a vacuum. Records collected in Hertfordshire contribute to our knowledge of larger geographical regions and the whole country. So it has to be seen in that context too. So first of all, time. And I don't know, I think I've seen this statement attributed to Isaac Newton. I don't know if it's completely correct, but essentially we stand on the shoulders of giants. Trevor was a giant, but one reason for his giantism is that he stood on the shoulders of giants. He stood on the shoulders of people who botanised the county before. And Hertfordshire is very fortunate in being one of the best botanically explored counties. I think partly because of its proximity to London, and a lot of early London naturalists can get down quite easy to the countryside. Of course, that means the detriment in terms of population encroachment and loss of habitats also. This has a claim to be the ugliest building in Hertfordshire. It's got a grandiose title of the North Herts Museum Annex. It's largely prefab, and it's in an unfashionable region of North Hitchin. But it's an absolute treasure trove. It contains the county herbarium. It contains loads and loads of information and correspondence relating both to Trevor, John Doney before him, and naturalists before him. And of course, it's not just botany. I'd be interested to know how many people have been in this building. Oh, a healthy number, great. So thinking now specifically, this is one of the outputs we're celebrating today. It's a fantastic contribution that Trevor made, but it wasn't the first flora of Hertfordshire, of course. There have been actually 4 publications which would qualify as a county flora. And the first is this, and this is Flora Hertfordiensis by Webb and Coleman, continuing the 19th century tradition of people who are naturalists, being either classics, being either teachers or vicars. And it's a book I like. It was the first of its kind, of course, for Hertfordshire. If I'm going to take you briefly through flora in time and space, let's latch on to a couple of species. This is one of my favourites. This is shepherd's needle. It's an odoriferous plant. Very characteristically, it has these long, extended fruits, which gives its English names. But scientific name is Scandic spectrum. Formerly common, now quite rare. So this is an example of a species that's declined. And the other one I thought was bird's foot, because this is a very rare plant in the county, but it's rare because it's ecologically very fastidious. It likes heathy grassland, and that's why the number of sites where it occurs are very limited, although I think it might be overlooked, because it is also quite inconspicuous. So if we go back to Flora Hertfordiensis, Scandix, the shepherd's needle, common in all districts. That's basically all it says. It's common everywhere, arrowhead. Bird's foot, rare, and a list of specific sites where it occurs. Some of which where it still does, and some where it doesn't, and it's actually colonised new sites since then. Then we come to, in 1887, Flora of Hertfordshire by Pryor. And this was a publication that John Doney tended to be a bit critical about, but it wasn't Pryor's fault, because he died in 1881, and the book was produced posthumously by a couple of editors. And just in passing, it is interesting to note here, edited for the Hertfordshire Natural History Society, which gives us a sense of humbling of history in that respect. This was the last flora to appear for 80 years, published in 1887. And if we go into Shepherd's Needle here, common in all districts. Birdfoot, listed in pretty much the same sites, rare, and it's rare enough for the specific sites to be mentioned. Now we come to this remarkable guy called John Doney, who we'll talk for ages about. But one of the important things that happened leading up to the publication of John Doney's Hertfordshire Flora, because he previously published one for Bedfordshire, was that BSBI and the county recording operations were taking much more note of the UK national grid as a means of mapping the distribution of species and understanding their distributions. And so it was one of the first two county floras to actually incorporate grid square recording and mapping. The other was a similar volume for Staffordshire. So just to digress very briefly in terms of recording units, because you see the unit over which you record depends on the resolution on which you want to get the records. So in Vice County, there's only one in Hertfordshire. Hertfordshire is a Vice County, and 157 in Britain and Ireland, which is the unit of the Botanical Society. Then you can go down from Myriad, we are mostly in Myriad TL. Hexads are a 10 by 10 km, and they are the unit for national recording as a rule. There's nearly 4,000 of those across Britain and Ireland. And tetrad, 2 by 2, so there's 25 of those in a hexad, and it is the unit that John Doney and others selected as the unit for county recording. There's 508 in Hertfordshire. Increasingly now, there's moved towards monad recording, which is one kilometre, I won't come into, but there's 1,500 of those roughly in Hertfordshire. I haven't counted them all. And whilst everyone, I think, would like to see a monad flora of Hertfordshire, it's not going to happen anytime soon. And 332,000 monads in the whole of Britain and Ireland, but that sort of depends whether the tide is in or out. So here's a hexad map for Hertfordshire. Most of the areas at TL, there's TQ down the bottom and SP in the west. And each of those hectares is divided here into 25 tetrads. If you label them from A to Z, bottom left to top right corner, leading out to O, the second row spells Dinty, and that's why you see this reference to Dinty as a description of tetrad mode and recording mode. And we are currently in Redbourne Parish, or whatever it's called, and that's in TL11, and more specifically, it's in tetrad TL11B. Right, preparation of Doney's flora. This is John Doney standing on the shoulders of giants. What he's done here is to photocopy relevant sections from Pryor's flora, and then he's annotated in his characteristic spiderly handwriting the new records that he has for that particular taxon. And the museum annex is full of boxes of these sheets. Then there's, of course, recording cards, and this is the John Doney recording card for tetrad. And very, very, very importantly, these are the first drafts of the tetrad maps that John Doney produced for the county flora. They were a little more polished in the published form. So John Doney, when we think about Shepherd's Needle, now has it down as occasional. It's no longer common. And Birdsfoot, rare and more limited, but it's actually limited to pretty much the sort of sites that were listed by Webb, Coleman and Pryor. It has been remarkably stable over time where habitats have been allowed to persist. And then, of course, we come to the 2009 forum by Trevor, and I remember attending a meeting in the late 80s convened by Trevor, and I can't remember when it was, and I can't remember where it was. But it was to organise, to coordinate recording for a new county flora that he was going to produce. And we divided up sort of units of the country, and everyone was sent away with responsibilities for contributing records. And the decision, which I'm sure was absolutely correct, was to continue recording on a tetrad basis, because it was manageable, and also it would allow direct comparison with the tetrad maps published in Derby. So this is Trevor's flora, and here's Shepherd's Needle, and here's Derby's map, and here's Trevor's map. About a 70% decline, continuing massive decline in the frequency of this species. And this is bird's foot, actually some of the points are slightly different, but mostly it's in the complete reflection of the Derby map. So there's the time sequence from Webb and Coleman through to John Derby's flora, published in 2009. What I want to do now is to go on to space. And the subtext is just a concession to anyone like me who's a Star Trek fan. It means nothing whatsoever otherwise. But this is the Vice County map of Britain and Ireland as adopted by Botanical Society and other national recording societies. A very quick digression. The SBI used to stand for British Botanical Society of British Isles. The people in the Republic of Ireland didn't like that, because they didn't really see themselves as part of the British Isles. In 2013, when I took over as president, we did some changes to structure and governance. We needed for a while to create a parallel society in a different way. So we renamed it Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland, still known as the SBI, of course. That really pleased people in the Republic of Ireland, but it definitely didn't please people in the Isle of Man and the Channel Islands. We can't please everyone, maybe. We are in Vice County 20, Hertfordshire, and it's quite humbling really to think all of these surrounding counties have exactly a very similar infrastructure to what we had in Hertfordshire with record centres, natural history societies, recorderships, groups of volunteers going out and recording. All that is happening in most at least of these Vice counties throughout the country. And the exciting thing really is when all these records from different Vice counties come together to give us an overall picture of the national status of plants and other taxonomic groups. So, there's a quote attributed to John Lennon about the evolution of popular music, which was before Elvis there was nothing. And I don't agree. I think Buddy Holly was much more important. But this is the Atlas of the British Flora, published in 1962 by the SBI. And it's fair to say that before this there was nothing in terms of systematic record of the flora of Britain. After this, there was everything. It started the fashion for grid square mapping on a national scale. It was one of the earliest examples of citizen science, because I think 1,500 participants contributed to this in the 1950s. This is before citizen science became a really sort of trendy concept. And led to about 1.5 million records that went into this 1960s in flora. These are record cards that were produced for that particular atlas. All the data was put onto punch cards, and this gives me a real sense of nostalgia because all my PhD data went onto these damn things, and I had huge numbers of boxes of them, which I was very pleased to dispose of eventually. These cards refer to something called Noxococcus illustris, which is actually cranberry. It's no longer called that, it's Vaccinium Noxococcus now. And there was other things, partly Franklin Herring was very responsible for this to some extent. The mechanizations produced the maps from computer punch cards. So these tetrad maps are the first time the tetrad maps of any organism in Britain and Ireland has been come out of the machine plotted on an hexagon scale. And it's spawned on successes. So here we are in 1962 with the first Botanic BSBI Plant Atlas. I'm very grateful to Chris Preston for this slide. And this is the increase in the number of atlases, national atlases of different taxonomic groups subsequently. So bryophytes, reptiles, ladybirds, and there's even the woodlice of British Isles, which I'm told is having the best time reading. It's a joke if there are any isopodphoneticists in the audience. And so this is the 1962 atlas with shepherd's needle showing as pretty widespread, but very much restricted to southeastern England. And interestingly, the bird's foot, which shows that Hertfordshire is actually a pretty insignificant county in terms of the national distribution of this plant, because it has status of distribution in New Forest, Surrey, Heathlands, Brecons, and elsewhere. 40 years later, 2002, came the new atlas of the British flora, adopting exactly the same tetra scale. And this 2002 atlas was one where I would suggest the bulk of Trevor's Hertfordshire records contributed. I don't think he would have contributed much to the 1962 atlas. But this contained the whole of the vascular plant database assembled by Trevor and colleagues that led to the production of the 2009 flora. Scandex, shepherd's needle, well, the dark red points are where it was still considered to be possibly present, but all these unfilled in symbols are where it had gone, so it's a massive decline. This is bird's foot, which is actually showing again very stable distribution, not just in Hertfordshire, but in this country as a whole, and possibly some additional areas because it's likely that it was being better recorded. And then, in March this year, we had the publication of this 2-volume Plant Atlas 2020, which BSBI has been working at, delivering at for at least 12 years. The 2 volumes are on the back table if anyone would like to look. They weigh 9 kilograms. And if people ask me, should they buy them, I say yes, I mean, if you want to, but actually, the website is much better and it's completely free of charge to everyone and it's got much more functionality. So I know there's always people who want books on their shelves. You think, I mean, you need to reinforce your wall to help these two. But everything is online. So we have huge amounts of information on, these are in the order there. So that's bird's foot, similar sort of distribution, but statistics about decline, altitude and distribution, all sorts of stuff. I'm not going to go into the detail. What shows here? Sure. Okay, well again, all those greyed out symbols show the previous sites, which have been in earlier atlases. So this is once an abundant arable weed, undergone completely precipitous decline, and all these trend lines and things point to that, which is now extremely rare. And so yes, okay, I'm going to conclude now with these thoughts. I mean, Trevor was a fantastic naturalist, he was a brilliant botanist, he had extraordinary expertise and identification skills. And all those are essential for someone to achieve what he achieved. But I mean, I've also tried to outline in this idea of time and space that if you're going to be successful in this sort of role, you need to also have a sort of sense of context. And you have to understand what's gone before, and you have to build on that, and you have to understand the broader geographical picture and build on that. And so there's a degree of, if we had to open the various traits that we've heard mentioned, almost a degree of humility, and that's also something I think that Trevor possessed in abundance. And finally, if you don't feel I've shown pictures of plants, past flower, very characteristic of Churchill, Fairfield Heath, Dyer's greenweed, a few sites in the county, but the best by far was Croxley Common Wall. Crested cowweed is on the verge of extinction in the county as it is nationally, but it hangs on in an arable headland near Luckhampton, where it's in need of some proper management. And shepherd's needle, which, despite having declined precipitously, locally and nationally, is still abundant on the Broadmoor field of Officer in the unherbicide sections of the Broadmoor experiment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It just shows the if we take Trevor's real, as you were saying, sustained commitment over time with energy, passion for this, but also that building on the shoulders of giants that comes through. And many of us, you continue to build on, obviously, the brilliant work Trevor's done over many years.